This is a map of North America according to the Fallout timeline. This original image was posted by a Reddit user whose @ will be up on screen now. And as far as I can tell, they are the original creator of this map. It's fully interactable. And it's got a lot of locations that plenty of casual Fallout fans will know, but the reason I felt the need to make a video about it is to go into more of the in-depth and speculative locations. It's worth noting that this map includes a lot of content and locations that are disputably canon. It includes stuff from Fallout Van Buren, Fallout Extreme, as well as the Tactics games. But, as you can probably tell, includes stuff from New Vegas, Fallout 4, and Fallout 3, as well as the original 2 games that are all undoubtedly canon. So I want to take a look at it and go over all the locations. But I want to just take a second to talk about why I'm doing this. Why do I think this deserves a series of videos? Why is it worth talking about? And that's twofold, really. One that I kind of mentioned already is that I'd love to look at all these, cut content, different, location possibilities. As most Fallout fans, I want there to be more of this game. I wish there was more of this game. And investigating this stuff is really interesting to me. But also, I want it to serve as an entry point to the Fallout universe to a lot of new players. People who aren't familiar with all this stuff. People who haven't played Fallout 1 and 2, and maybe not even 3 at this rate. Because those games are starting to get older and older as we progress throughout the years. But also, I want to make this a disclaimer at the onset that I am no Fallout expert. I love these games. I love them a lot. Played all of them. Even 1. I beat 1. You can count me on that. A lot of the Fallout fandom can get a bit extreme the further back you go into 2D Fallout. But, yeah, just a disclaimer. This all comes from a place of love for this game series and the lore and all of the intrigue behind it. And that's what I want to talk about. Okay? Cool. So, let's start off this first part by talking about Caesar's Legion, which pretty much most Fallout fans have encountered, if anyone's ever played New Vegas. You know that the central conflict in that game is between the Legion and the NCR, the New California Republic. And the main tipping point is the battle over Hoover Dam. Or rather, the second battle over Hoover Dam, but we'll get into that later. When we first see Caesar's Legion, you only see them in military camps preparing to march across the Colorado. But what's revealed later is that they're a fully functioning civilization. They have cities. They have an entire economy back home. They have their own money that they print with their leaders' faces on them. And we know that Caesar's Legion encompasses almost all of Arizona, a good chunk of New Mexico, and stretches all the way up to Denver, Colorado. And we'll talk about each of those cities and locations independently. But the broad strokes here is that they're probably one of the most powerful forces in the Southwest at the time of Fallout New Vegas. And their entire goal and purpose is to keep expanding into California. They also seek to assimilate other tribes in Utah, we see in the Honest Hearts DLC, and there'll be more talk of that once we cover some of the more minor tribes. But in summation, Caesar's Legion is a collection of tribes, and they all homogenize into one single tribe. Modeled, exactly the same way after Roman civilization. In the same way, they're a brutal military dictatorship that also relies pretty heavily on a slave economy. So as Caesar's Legion takes on more and more tribes, they not only get more soldiers, they get more slaves, they get more land and resources, and they keep pushing. That's their main way to progress forward. So let's talk briefly about where the Legion got its start. Where did this military power, come from? And it all started, essentially, with a mission trip gone wrong. It was founded by a collection of people, but principally Edward Sallow, who we now know as Caesar, or Caesar, depending on who you ask. But originally, he was a follower of the Apocalypse, which is a group that essentially act as Good Samaritan scientists. Their entire mission statement is to preserve all of this old world knowledge about farming and medicine and infrastructure and pass it on to the survivors in the wasteland to try to, make people's lives better. They rely on a lot of donations. They don't really have a standing military. They trade protection and favors for their knowledge. So, Sallow set off to make contact with a tribe known as the Blackfoots. He was eventually joined by a Mormon missionary named Joshua Graham, who's also a very important character, and also Bill Calhoun, who was another follower of the Apocalypse, which is another character that we don't get to see, but we hear mention of. His face is also on Legion money, so presumably he was very important in some capacity that we don't really know too much about him. But anyway, this, this mission group sets out, and they end up making contact with these Blackfoots, and eventually they're just captured, and they're going to be sold and ransomed. But what ends up happening is the group learns that the Blackfoots are at war with 7 other different local tribes in Arizona. It's not specified which area of Arizona this is. All we know is that it's in Arizona somewhere. But the Blackfoots don't have, obviously, any advanced technology. They don't have any military strategy. They're, a loose tribe, hunter-gatherer type people. And they're, raiding other hunter-gatherer type people. So eventually, what happens is that Calhoun and also Sallow, but ultimately Sallow, makes the decision to teach the Blackfoot how to fight. Teaches them how to use guns, how to use explosives, how to, march in formation and launch surprise attacks. All these things that he learned from, presumably pre-war soldier training manuals and things like that, and general knowledge. Despite the strong protest of Joshua Graham, who didn't want this tribe to learn, how to become a militant war band, but essentially to make sure they didn't die there as captives, Edward Sallow makes the, let's say, executive decision to teach them how to fight, and it works. They kill the other tribes single-handedly, like by a landslide. It was an absolute slaughter. Caesar describes this as playing war, and he was the one who taught them how to actually, make war. And that is, essentially, the birthplace of the Legion. This first tribe, where this man came in with all this military knowledge, taught them how to fight, and all of a sudden, they conquered all the local tribes around them. And from that point onward, it just kept growing. And this is where they eventually, like I said, reach all the way up to Colorado. Colorado is an interesting point, too. It's said that almost the entire city is overrun by dogs when the Legion got there. So, when they recruited assimilated the Hang Dogs tribe who hung out in Colorado, they also took with them a bunch of these dogs, and a bunch of, feral attack dogs are essentially employed by Caesar's Legion now that they have this tribe under their control. But then the rest of the city, some of it's still standing. There's talk of skyscrapers and people having to, build civilizations inside of skyscrapers or at the top of them so that they can avoid just apparently hordes of dogs roaming the streets of Denver, which is an interesting point. But as with a lot of this map and a lot of this lore, it's all speculative. So let's talk about our first really big Legion location or city, which is Flagstaff. It's described as the capital of the Legion, although we never see it in game and it's never really described to us at all. The only thing definitive we know about it is that in 2255, the city got taken over by the Legion, and they said, "This is it. This is our capital," which has, left everyone to speculate and draw up whatever concept art we can to sort of envision, what would a Legion city look like? Because, like I mentioned earlier, there's really no baseline example for what a proper Caesar's Legion city could or should look like. So that's kind of a good thing. It leaves a lot of room for creative interpretation. But, it also leaves us a bit wanting. On the topic of Arizona, though, we also have both Phoenix and Tucson as mentioned locations. However, Tucson is, now post-war known as Tucson. We learn about Tucson from Raul, one of the companions you can get in Fallout New Vegas. And he lived there pre-Legion. He's a pre-war ghoul, and he's, lived hundreds of different lives and has all sorts of, backstory to him as a character. But, he just describes it as the place where he lived before moving out to the Mojave proper. So we don't really know much about that either. And then in terms of Phoenix, it's only ever mentioned by Joshua Graham. The person who we mentioned earlier essentially founded the Legion with Caesar and served as his right-hand man, as his legate. Graham was known as the Malpais legate, which is most likely a reference to Malpais, the national monument in Arizona, but beyond that, we don't know. But when Joshua Graham describes Phoenix, he doesn't say anything important. He says it's much like any other city. It's just a place with rubble and with ruins, so we can assume it's pretty much all destroyed. But it is possible that, Legion is camped out around it or in the ruins and are making a civilization there. That's all we can really speculate about. So if we go down a little further south here along the Colorado, we can see that border between the NCR and the Legion. And there's a few interesting locations worth pointing out. The biggest one is going to be Willow Beach, which is a pretty important battle site. After that first battle of Hoover Dam, which I'll summarize briefly here, was when the Legion first tried to run across Hoover Dam and take it, but they were beaten back by the NCR by essentially setting a trap for them in Boulder City. A whole bunch of explosives were used, and that was the inciting incident that led Joshua Graham to be taken by Caesar for his failure, lit on fire, and then kicked into the Grand Canyon, giving birth to the legend of the Burned Man in the Legion and its territories. But once again, we'll cover Joshua Graham's story a bit more when we talk about the tribes over in Utah and how that narrative connects back to the larger one here. But after that defeat, the Legion was still pushing against the NCR. The NCR was still holding territory in Arizona across that border, and they were trying to hold the Colorado. So they eventually just overran the NCR and the combined efforts of the Rangers to take all of Arizona. And what we also see down here is Bloomfield Space Center, which is worth pointing out because it's an old Air Force base. Has a bunch of, planes and stuff, but it also houses 2 space shuttles, which is interesting. We never see that, but they got space shuttles stored there, so who knows? That'd be interesting to see in a game someday. Below that, there is the Yuma Proving Ground, which is another military base. And we learn about this from one of the Legion soldiers. And all we know about it is that, it's another, military base that's been looted. It's under Legion control. And it is presumably where the Legion is getting all of its artillery and firepower. The Legion doesn't use that much, in the way of explosives or guns and whatnot. But the howitzers and assault batteries that they do have are apparently coming from down south in Yuma. Alright, so now we're going to get into what is, in my opinion, some of the more interesting stuff in Caesar's Legion. Some of these northern-ish territories deep into the Legion. And as some of you will probably notice from the map, if you see that little grayed out section up there, that is at least assumed to be the home turf of the Dead Horses, one of the tribes that find themselves in Zion as we go through the Honest Hearts DLC. But that bit up there, a little further into Utah, is where they're believed to originate from. And that also plays into the res, or the reservation, which is, as you can see, right on top of the Navajo Nation territory. And it's believed that the reason these tribes have such a unique dialect is it's a mix of the original dialect, presumably Navajo, and potentially some Spanish mixed in there, but accompanied by tourists who were visiting the area when the bombs fell. And over time, these languages meshed together and created this whole new language that is being, attempted to translate by people like Joshua Graham and some of the other interpreters. In addition to that, further on down the highway line is Fort Aradesh, which is, or was, originally an NCR post back when they were holding this territory, but as it got overran, the Legion, took it over and is presumably using it to continue to outfit their expansion west. So there is another location that is presumed to be in Caesar's Legion territory, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the Legion. And that is Tibet's prison, which is, once again, some cut content, not really canon, but I really want it to be, so we're going to talk about it. The prison was originally a military prison, and it had been before the war. But eventually it became so advanced and so automated that they had robot wardens, they had AI controlling the whole place, and it was still designed to have some of the most dangerous criminals that the U.S. had ever, captured or faced, both foreign and domestic. And eventually it was used as a quarantine facility for the new virus. The new virus being, the mystery plague that was affecting so many, that eventually gave birth to the FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, to try to combat it, that then created super mutants, that then went a little haywire and leads into a whole bunch of, Fallout relevant events. But when they were still trying to combat this virus initially, Vault-Tec got involved, because of course they did. And they were working with the US government to, better design this prison. It's all left very vague and speculative, but it would be an amazing location, especially if we can assume there might still be dangerous criminals inside. Somehow, some of them might be on life support, some of them are probably long dead, but somewhere out there, there is a fully automated prison, like a maximum security prison. So, there are a few more tribes worth discussing, and a lot of these are either mentioned by our talks with Ulysses in the Lonesome Road DLC, or passing conversation with legionaries, and also some of it is Van Buren stuff, so a bit of cut content and unreleased stuff there too. But I really want to talk about it because so many of these tribes are so interesting to me. The one we're going to talk about is the Twin Mothers tribe, who are apparently somewhere up in Colorado. But what's notable about them is that they are apparently the ones who created, or are still creating, the bitter drink, or the recipe for it, which is an item in Fallout. It's a healing item, and it's described as, essentially morphine. It's an incredibly strong painkiller. And when the Legion found out about it, they obviously wanted it. The Legion doesn't use many stims. They frown on that. They frown on using stims and chemicals and any addictive substance. So they were looking for, I guess, a natural morphine, which is what Twin Mothers provided them. Twin Mothers is also interesting in that they're a matriarchal society, so the women are in charge and making the decisions. They're also a very, peaceful tribe. They, don't really aggress against anyone. They defend themselves when they have to. They're not complete pacifists, but they're not actively out making war or anything. They were actually seeking to, give people knowledge. So it's assumed that maybe they gave Caesar's Legion this medicine freely, but then what we know pretty much for certain is that they were conquered and assimilated into the Legion. Which is sad, considering that if it's a tribe of mostly women, most of those women are either killed or probably enslaved at this rate. And whatever men were living there have probably been conscripted. Another tribe supposedly in Colorado are the Ciphers. But the Ciphers are also really interesting because they're not tribals in the way that you might think with primitive technology. They understand, engineering and electronics and all this stuff. And that's done in their cave paintings. That's what they're known for. They have a bunch of body paint and face paint and all this stuff. And it's, I guess, speculated that a group of scientists and U.S. military soldiers were stationed in New Mexico. And after, the bombs dropped and they managed to survive, they ended up, wandering until they eventually found themselves in this new area in the south of the Colorado. And yeah, there's a whole bunch more to get into, but the long and short of it is that they're essentially a technologically literate tribe. And like I said, they were also going to be in Van Buren, so there was a little quest line for them that is vaguely outlined. If you'd like to look at this stuff on the wiki for yourself, you can find it there. But I think it's just interesting to note that there was potentially a tribe that had a better understanding of technology than a lot of other factions we see in Fallout games. We'll talk more later on about the Brotherhood and some of the Reavers, the Reaver movement, and all that stuff. We'll get into that. But yeah, I'm always excited when I see a tribe that is big into technology, because I think that's a cool theme. One quick note that I'll make is if you look up at the top over in Utah, you'll see a town called Ouroboros, and that is presumably the home settlement or the home, I guess, raiding area of the gang known as the Vipers, which is one of the many gangs who are really harassing the NCR more than the Legion. The NCR is so spread out and so stretched thin that they're having a tough time defending all of their supply routes to these other communities and settlements. We'll also talk probably in the next video about the 80s, which are one of my favorite, I think, under-hyped factions in Fallout. They seem really cool. But yeah, that's just an explanation for where the Vipers come from. We see them a bit in Fallout New Vegas. You'll run into Vipers and Jackals, some of those other street gangs. The one thing really worth noting that's kind of clever is the Ouroboros is basically a giant snake that eats itself. And yeah, there's a connection there somewhere. Maybe it's just a clever name. In terms of what was planned for Van Buren, Ouroboros was going to be the hangout location, I guess, of a character named Hecate, who is essentially, I guess, insane, proclaimed herself a god, and convinced a bunch of people to rally around her, one of which is presumed to be the Vipers. But what's interesting about her is that she is at least supposed to be a member of the Twisted Hares, one of the tribes that Ulysses interacted with while he was working with the Legion. And this tribe was dominant in the region for a long time, but as Caesar's Legion rose to power and taught the tribes how to fight back and eventually assimilated them all, the Twisted Hairs were essentially, pushed back and scattered. And she's, I don't know, maybe one of the only ones left. Presumably she wasn't killed by the Legion and she still operates on her own. This is where things get speculative and murky, if they haven't been already. But it's an interesting thing to think about, and it would be really cool to see more challenges to Legion power, and then, being able to interact one-on-one with those tribes would be, I think, a pretty interesting quest line. The last location to mention is Circle Junction, which was the final site of a group of tribals known as the Iron Rivers, who were sort of this primitive nomadic tribe. But what they did was they followed the rail lines all the way up to Circle Junction, talking about a great roaring machine, which is presumably a train, that was either functioning or somehow someone got it moving, did something to make them think that this technology could come back. They were another tribe that sort of worship technology and have a lot of folklore about it and whatnot. We don't really learn too much beyond that. But the last thing we hear about them is that in 2253, the Legion finally encircled them, corralled them, and presumably killed and enslaved them all. So that was the end of them. They got to follow a train and then get killed. And yeah, that does it for this first part of the, I guess, North American Fallout map as we know it. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of cut content to be had here, but I really enjoy looking at it. I think it helps to flush out the world, especially for Caesar's Legion, a group that we don't get to learn too much about culturally, aside from the fact that they just take all these tribes, these unnamed tribes, and bring them under this one sort of Roman Pax Romana banner. And then, send them all to fight in sports equipment with machetes. But I think the tribes that they conquered are cool in their own right. And it's another case of me just being sad that Van Buren got canned and never got to see the light of day. Because it looked like a project that really wanted to fill in all these different factions and sort of flush out the lore a bit more. But at the same time, I am more than happy to sit back here and speculate about it all. But yeah, that will do it for this first episode. Mostly just covering Caesar's Legion stuff and a bit of other things. But let me know if you would like to see me cover the rest of the map. There's still so much to talk about. NCR territory will probably have to be its own video. Midwest Brotherhood of Steel could be its own video, as could the East Coast. Really depends on what anyone cares to hear about. I think a lot of the stuff in Texas and Mexico is pretty cool too. But yeah, this was just the video I threw together to get some conversation going. Give me some ideas in the comments. Talk about locations that I might have missed, or stuff that I didn't flush out properly, because a lot of this I hadn't heard about before, especially some of the more obscure Van Buren locations. But yeah, I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to get people engaged. If this can be a jumping off point for Fallout lore, I consider that a win. And if you made it all the way to the end of this pretty long video now, thanks. And hopefully I will see you in the next one.